Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Mulan 2020. So, Mulan 2020 is directed by Nikki Caro and stars Liu Yifei, Jason Scott Lee, Donnie Yen, and Gong Li. The story is basically about Flori Khan, who's invading China and trying to take it over. So Mulan's father basically is called on to come into this war, but Mulan decides to disguise herself as a man so she can take his place because she doesn't want to get hurt and trying to stop the Rorons. The story was rather mixed, to say the least. I mean, obviously they took a lot out from the original story, which I'm okay. I would be okay with, but I'll get back into that later. But the stuff that they kept in the original story is the stuff that does flow well together, and there are a few other elements of it that does kind of flow well. But the most of the ones that do flow well is the stuff that they brought back from the original into this movie, and I do feel like just those kind of stuff just make the story kind of rather than downright trash. Again, Mulan's character is kind of mixed. I mean, there are some things about her character that were the stuff that they kept in, her whole reason for wanting to take her father's place, which they left him from the original, does work here as well, and I do feel like it does flow well, but there are definitely some elements of her character that isn't very good that I'll get into later. I'd say the acting is pretty good mostly for what it is, at least for Jason Scott Lee. He does do a pretty good job as a kind of main villain, Lord Khan, and I do feel like he does do a pretty good job. I just can feel like the character, and it does seem like he's trying at least. And then Gong Li as well kind of does a pretty good job as the kind of wit character, and I do feel like it's definitely mostly good. The action was mixed, and outside of some of the editing issues, the climax is pretty cool for what it is. I mean, it does get you pretty engaging, it does have tension pretty high, and I do feel like it is mostly good outside of a few editing problems that I'll get into later. Cinematography is pretty good. I do feel like they do use the right camera angles for the right time, and it definitely does kind of capture the moments pretty well, especially there are a few scenes that they definitely do show the characters' emotions, and I feel like they do a pretty good job at that, using the correct camera angle for the correct time, and it does really work for the scenes, especially in some of the interaction scenes, and as well as just some of the scenes in general. I do feel like they do have pretty good cinematography. The lighting is pretty good. I mean, the movie's mostly in daytime. When it's at nighttime, I do feel like they use enough of it so you can see what's going on. I feel like they use enough lighting in this movie so you can see what's going on. So it's definitely pretty good. The editing is rather mediocre, if I'm being honest. I mean, it does work when it's in a normal scene and they're just interacting and stuff like that. I do feel like it does end pretty smoothly, and it goes from one shot to another pretty smoothly when they're just interacting. The scene just kind of like a normal kind of scene, and I do feel like it does work in those scenes, but there are elements of it that don't work that I'll get back into later. The score is really good. I mean, they did obviously take out all the songs, but I do feel like the score itself, it does kind of blend well with what's going on mostly, and I do feel like it works for the moment specifically, and I do feel like it makes sense for them to kind of use this kind of music, and it does kind of work for the background and the songs, and it does get you more in the scene, and does make you feel more into it. Set designs are really good. It does kind of give you the feeling of kind of ancient China, and it does really kind of feel like it, and I feel like they do a pretty good job with that, and it definitely does give you the feeling of ancient China when you're kind of in the neighborhood and kind of over by the palace, and I do really like how they end up doing that, as it does really work for scenes, especially also when they're training and stuff. They do a pretty good job, and I do kind of like the elements, and each set does kind of work, and it definitely does feel more like ancient China when they're there, and I do think they did a pretty good job here replicating that. Same thing does go for the costume designs. I do feel like they kind of like give you the feeling of ancient China, and they do kind of like match a lot of ancient China scenes, and it definitely does really work for the movie, and it definitely does like, kind of fit the kind of time period as it's kind of takes place in ancient China, and I definitely think that a lot of this definitely does have the ancient China kind of feeling. That said, this movie definitely does have its negatives. I mean, the story, like, well, it did try something different, and like, a lot of the different things that they tried just weren't executed very well. I mean, I do feel like that the movie does kind of like feel like it's just one long training sequence for a lot of the movie, as most of the majority of this movie's story is filled with like the training sequences, and I do feel like just they could have like easily made it more entertaining there, and it just kind of like dragged on because there's just too much of that, and it does make it feel like it's going on for way too long. And I think the biggest problem with this movie is just how they kind of make it feel less entertaining, because a lot of it's just a lot of training sequences, and just how Mulan just kind of revealed herself as well was like random, and I feel like just kind of stupid, if I'm being honest. I mean, that they had some new characters in this that like I don't really serve a purpose that much, and I just think that a lot of this movie's changes weren't executed very well. The structure is not good at all, pretty much. I mean, you have the first act, like, it opens very weirdly with, like, Mulan chasing this chicken, which I guess is kind of hilariously bad, but, like, if you look at it story-wise, it just doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's completely random to start the movie that way, as it's just kind of like an opening scene, and it just kind of, like, tells you, doesn't really give you exactly a good idea of this movie, and just, it kind of comes off as kind of weird, and it's just kind of funny for the wrong reasons at times, I guess. But then there's the kind of second act, which just, yeah, it definitely does drag on a lot. It's full of training sequences, and they don't really do anything to make it feel entertaining, and it just really drags on for a bit because of that. And I wish they definitely did knew a bit of a better job with that, and as well, same thing with like how Mulan ended up kind of like revealing herself, which is kind of stupid. I mean, it just didn't really make sense story-wise, and they just kind of just put it there in there because they needed to, and I felt like just did not really work for the story of this movie. Then there's the pacing, which, I mean, it's just not good at all. I mean, it just can drag on for way too long with all the training sequences, like I said earlier, and it just makes the movie kind of a slog to get through. Like I said earlier, there was one element of Mulan's character that I really wasn't a fan of. I mean, like, obviously, when she revealed herself to, like, the army, that was kind of stupid, but also, like, the whole kind of, like, cheat thing that they add to her character, which they don't really expand on it. I wish they did a bit more with this kind of chi power. I mean, if they're gonna give it to her, at least they kind of expand upon it with a bit, as they just didn't really do much with it. They just kind of like introduced the idea, but like they don't really do much with it, so it just kind of makes it feel a bit useless to her character. And a lot of the other characters could have been cut, but like besides that, like there's the main villain, kind of Border Khan. I mean, he just doesn't really feel as intimidating in this version as Shan Yu does in the original, and it just feels like they could have done a much better job with him. I mean, they don't really do much with him, and they don't make him intimidating at all, if I'm being honest. And I just don't really feel intimidated by him because they don't really do much with him. And then kind of like goes for the secondary antagonist as this witch creature. They don't really say her name in the movie, and I wish that they did a bit more with her here. I mean, I get kind of why they added her character, but like they don't really do much with her, so like it doesn't really feel like she serves much of a purpose to this plot. Then there's Yafei Wu, however pronounce her name, who plays Mulan, and she does not really do a very good job. I mean, she doesn't do terrible. I mean, there's some scenes where she does decent in, but like a lot of this movie, she seems like she's not really doing a good job. I mean, she doesn't really seem like she's delivering it with confidence in some scenes, and I definitely feel like she could have done much better in her role. Like I said earlier, the action scenes are kind of mixed. I mean, there are a few of them that I feel like definitely could have gone without, like the whole kind of Groudon kind of thing, where like they're attacking people and then I mean, I feel like they could have gone without that scene, but 100% okay. And I feel like it's kind of like useless to the plot, and it didn't really add much to it, and doesn't really add that much attention to it. They can just add like a random scene in the middle, and doesn't really feel that much like there's much attention to it. Visual effects are just awful. I mean, there are many times where it just looks completely fake and unrealistic, like the whole avalanche scene, basically. I mean, that does have like some very bad looking CGI. It just doesn't really look very convincing, and yeah, this movie uses visual effects. It just does not look very good, and it's pretty incomplete to me. Like I said earlier, the editing is very mediocre, especially like during the action scenes is like when it really stands out as bad. I mean, like they just use too many camera angles for them, so like they kind of like move around way too fast, and it just kind of makes it a bit exhausting to look at because they're just moving so many camera angles at once that it just isn't very smooth, and it just is a bit ridiculously all over the place with camera angles because they keep switching it every single split second. So overall, Mulan 2020 isn't a good movie by any means, but also isn't really that bad of a movie. It definitely could have been much worse, and I definitely feel like it's an overall average movie. So I'm gonna give Mulan 2020 a 6 out of 10. That was my review of Mulan 2020. What are your thoughts on Mulan 2020? Tell me in the comments below. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.